Hello and welcome to the Analyst dated 7th August 2023 by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we will be covering the important current affairs articles from both the Hindu as well as Indian Express. And the handout of this very discussion would be available to you in the description below. So let's have a look over the articles that we are going to cover today. So firstly, we will be covering this concept called separation of power. Then we will be looking into the revised manufacturing norms which the government has right now imposed on the pharmaceutical manufacturing units. Then we will be looking into the aspects related to railway infrastructure in India. What are the issues in that? What all steps the government has taken in order to enhance rail connectivity in India, and what more needs to be done. Then we will be looking into a report which has been recently published by Zoological Survey of India with regard to the endemic bird species in India. Then we will be looking into the impact of increased sugar production in India on the groundwater levels in India. So the first article relates to the concept of separation of power, and this article relates to this very aspect of your GS paper 2 syllabus, and we also have a previous year question in this regard. So after listening to this very discussion, please try and attempt this very question. Let's try and understand the context first. So the context is, recently the controversial Jan Vishwas Act has been enacted. Now in this regard, the first thing that we need to understand is, what is this Jan Vishwas Act all about? Through this very act, what the government has done, it has decriminalized certain offences and it has made certain offences compoundable. What are compoundable offences? Wherein the complainant and the accused can enter into a compromise and they can withdraw the case from the courts. And the Jan Vishwas Act has basically made these changes in 42 legislations. The controversial part of this very act is, as the writer has pointed out, is in this very act, the government has given the power to impose the penalties to the bureaucracy. As these power to impose the penalties should be with the judiciary. For example, in Indian Forest Acts, the power has been given to the forest officials that they have to conduct the inquiry that how much damage has been done to the forest by any person, and they would be having the power to impose the penalties according to the damage being done by that particular person. Similarly, under the Environment Protection Act, the bureaucracy would be having the power to impose the penalties. Now in this regard, the writer argues that this is a violation of the constitutional scheme, that is separation of power, which is enshrined in our Indian constitution as well. Now the first thing that we need to understand with regard to this article is, what is exactly separation of power? Now we know that there are three organs of the state: legislature, executive and judiciary. Now according to the separation of power, the role of the legislative wing is to make laws. The role of executive wing is to implement those laws which have been made by the legislature. And the role of the judiciary is to use those laws which have been made by the legislature to adjudicate a particular case. Okay? Now, according to the separation of power, it is based on three principles. First is, if an individual A, let's say, is a part of judiciary, then this individual A cannot be a part of the legislature, or it cannot be a part of the executive. So if a person is a part of a particular organ of a state, the same person cannot be a part of the other organ of the state. This is first principle. Second principle of separation of power is, a particular organ, let's say legislature, and this is the another organ, judiciary. Now legislature is not allowed to interfere in the functioning of the judiciary. This is the second principle. And the third principle is, the legislature is not allowed to take up the functioning of the judiciary. Okay, whatever role has to be performed or whatever functions have to be performed by the judiciary, the legislature is not allowed to take up that functions. Okay, so these are the three principles of separation of power. Okay, now The separation of power is also found in our Indian constitution through these various constitutional articles. Before we cover these constitutional articles, let's just briefly discuss what is the significance of separation of power. So this separation of power basically ensures that there is no concentration of power in the hands of one particular organ. And if there is no concentration of power in the hands of one particular organ, there would not be any despotic tendencies. Okay? And it also ensures efficiency in the administration, okay? Because the power is distributed. All the three organs have their requisite functions which they have to perform. So it also ensures efficiency in the administration. These are primarily the significance of separation of power. Let's just quickly go through the constitutional articles which basically relates to separation of power. Under Article 50, the states have to take the steps in order to separate the judiciary from the executive, okay, in order to ensure the independence of the judiciary. Then, under Article 121 and 211, the parliaments and the state legislature are debarred from discussing the conduct of the Supreme Court as well as High Court judges until and unless there is a motion for removal of a particular judge of the Supreme Court or High Court. Then, according to Article 122 and 212, the courts are debarred from inquiring into the validity of the parliamentary proceedings and the proceedings of any of its parliamentary committee. Okay, the same applies to state legislatures as well. Then, according to Article 53, the executive power at the union level is bestowed on the president, and according to 154 of the Indian Constitution, the executive power at the state level is bestowed on the governor, okay, shall reside in the governor. Then, according to Article 361 of the Indian Constitution, both the president and the governor are not answerable to any court for exercise of their functions and duties of their office. Okay? And then, according to Article 74, subclause 2, the courts are debarred from inquiring into the advice tendered by the Council of Ministers to the President, and the same is the case with regard to states under Article 163, subclause 3. So, these constitutional articles basically outline the separation of power in the Indian Constitution. Now, despite we are saying this fact that when it comes to Indian Constitution, we have separation of power. But in India, we also see functional overlapping. How come? When it comes to executive and the legislature, the first principle that we discuss with regard to separation of power is, if a person is a part of one organ, then it cannot be a part of the other organ. But this principle of separation of power gets violated here only, because when it comes to the Indian Parliament, the ministers or the executives are basically the MPs. So, this is one functional overlapping. Then, what we are witnessing is, on account of lack of opposition in the House, okay, in both the 16th as well as in the 17th Lok Sabha, what is happening is, majority of the bills are getting passed without much debate and discussion. Then, we are witnessing increase resorting to ordinance route, okay, under Article 123 of the Indian Constitution. And we are also witnessing this recent phenomena called delegated legislation. What is this delegated legislation? Under this, the Parliament basically outlines the broad framework of a particular law, and it is the executive which has to, or the bureaucracy which has to basically fill in the minute details of that particular law. So it is giving more powers to the executive when it comes to the legislative work. Okay, so these are the functional overlapping that we are witnessing when it comes to the executive and the legislature. Then, when it comes to the legislation and the judiciary, what is the functional overlapping that we are seeing here? When it comes to the judiciary, we are witnessing judicial activism. Like, for example, in the recent Anu Baranwal versus Union of India case, wherein the Supreme Court basically changed the appointment procedure of the members of ECI. However, this power was something which was given to the Parliament under Article 324 of the Indian Constitution. So, in form of judicial activism, we are witnessing, violation of the doctrine of separation of power. Then, when it comes to the legislature wing, what we are witnessing is, it is misusing its lawmaking power. How come? The legislature basically brought the Government of National Capital Territory of Delhi Amendment Act 2021 in order to do away with the Supreme Court judgment in this regard, which was delivered in 2018. Okay? Government of NCT of Delhi versus Union of India. So, on account of this, we are witnessing is that the separation of power is getting violated on account of these functional overlapping when it comes to legislature and executive. Now, let's see the functional overlapping when it comes to the executive and the judiciary. Again, when it comes to the judiciary, we are witnessing judicial activism. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the judiciary, gave a lot of directions to the executive when it comes to administering the COVID-19 vaccination. Okay, they ordered that the government should provide COVID-19 vaccination for free. They provided, issued guidelines with regard to managing the migrant crisis which was there at that time. Now, this basically implies entering or interfering into the executive domain. Remember? This we discuss is the second principle, that no organ is supposed to interfere in the functioning of the another organ. Okay. When it comes to the executive, how are we witnessing the functional overlapping? Certain aspects have been pointed out by the writer himself, that when it comes to the executive, what we are witnessing is, when it comes to the tribunals, it is the bureaucrats who are being appointed as technical members in the tribunals. And when it comes to tribunals, the executive play a very important role when it comes to the appointment of the members of these tribunals. And in this regard, the judiciary has time and again pointed out that when executive is the majority, in majority of the cases, executive is the major litigant, then how come executive play a major role when it comes to the appointment of the members of tribunal? So, in this regard, we are violating the doctrine of separation of power. Then, when it comes to the regulatory authorities, like SEBI, like Competition Commission of India, again, the members of these regulatory authorities are basically the bureaucrats who have been given the power to impose penalties on the private sector. And when it comes to the adjudicatory officers, okay, under prevention of money laundering, under Food Safety and Standard Act, what we are witnessing is, again, these adjudicatory officers are basically belonging to the bureaucracy, and they have been given the power to impose penalties and confiscate the property. Okay, so this is basically the violation of doctrine of separation of power that we are witnessing with regard to all the three organs. Now, apart from doctrine of separation of power, the Indian Constitution also have a system of checks and balance in place. What is the system of checks and balance? We have judicial review under Article 13, 32, 226 of the Indian Constitution, wherein the Supreme Court and the High Court have the power to examine the constitutionality of both the legislative enactments as well as executive orders. Okay, then we have this concept called collective responsibility, which is provided under Article 75, subclause 3, according to which the Lok Sabha basically has the power to remove the executive from the office by passing a no confidence motion. Now, this ensures a system of checks and balance between the legislature and the executive way. Okay, then when it comes to the appointment of judges, which is done under Article 124, subclause 2 and 217, it is basically the executive, okay, it is the president who appoints the judges of both the Supreme Court as well as the High Court. So, it establishes a system of checks and balance between the judiciary and the executive. Then, when it comes to the removal of judges, which is done under Article 124, subclause 4 of the Indian Constitution. So, under this, the President can remove a particular judge of the Supreme Court when a motion in this regard has been passed by both the houses by a special majority. So this again establishes a system of checks and balance between the judiciary and the legislative wing. Okay. Then we have also the provision with regard to dissolution of Lok Sabha. So the Prime Minister can advise to the President that to dissolve the Lok Sabha. Okay, it is an executive prerogative. So on account of these features, we can see that when it comes to Indian Constitution, we have separation of power, but in a broader sense only. We do not have rigid separation of power. That is something that we witness in case of American Constitution, because the American Constitution, wherein they have presidential system of government, it is basically based on the system or principle of the separation of power. And in this regard, the Supreme Court in Indira Gandhi versus Raj Narayan case 1975 has clearly stated that when it comes to the Indian Constitution, we have separation of power, but only in a broader sense. We do not follow rigid separation of power as is there in case of American Constitution, because rigid separation of power is neither feasible nor desirable. This is all that we need to know with regard to this article. Let's move to the next one. Now this next article pertains to the revised manufacturing norms for the drug firms in India. And this article pertains to this very aspect of your GS paper 2 syllabus. Let's try and understand the context. So the context is, recently the government has directed all the pharmaceutical companies to implement this good manufacturing practices. Okay, and in this regard, the government has stated that the bigger pharmaceutical firms which have a turnover of more than 250 crores, okay, they have to implement these good manufacturing practices within a time frame of 6 months. Whereas the small and the medium pharmaceutical manufacturing units which have a turnover of less than 250 crores, they have to implement these good manufacturing practices within a time frame of 1 year. Now in this regard, the first thing that you need to understand is, what is this good manufacturing practices all about? This was something which was brought by WHO. So this good manufacturing practice basically looks into this thing that we have quality pharmaceutical products. And this quality would not only be ensured at the final stage, okay, by testing that product, but under this good manufacturing practices, we make sure that every pharmaceutical product goes through similar procedure, okay, the same procedure, the same conditions of production. So we build quality into a particular product, and this basically have provided guidelines with regard to all the stages of manufacturing. Okay, with regard to quality personnel required, with regard to documentation process, with regard to testing the particular pharmaceutical products, etc. So it has provided, this practice provides guideline with regard to every stage of manufacturing when it comes to pharmaceutical products. Okay, and this was basically brought by WHO. Now, before we move on to this revised manufacturing norms which have been recently implemented by the Union government, we first need to understand what is the state of India pharma sector, okay, across the globe. First thing is, India is the largest provider of generic drugs globally. India pharma sector basically meets 40% of the generic drugs demand in US and 25% of the generic drug demand in UK. And around 80% of the generic drugs which are required for treatment of AIDS globally are provided by Indian pharmaceutical sector. Then we are the largest producer of vaccines. Okay, we provide more than 50% of the vaccines across the globe. Then the Indian pharmaceutical sector basically came up with this innovation called fixed dose combination drugs. What are these fixed dose combination drugs? Wherein the active ingredients are there, okay, 2 or more active ingredients would be there in a fixed dose ratio. And these fixed dose combination drugs are basically being used to treat the TB, malaria, etc. Okay? Why these fixed dose combination drugs are being created? In order to, take the benefit of synergetic effects of the two pharmaceutical products. Then when it comes to the growth potential of India pharma sector, the economic survey has pointed out that the Indian pharma sector is supposed to grow 3 times. Okay, it is supposed to increase from 42 billion US dollars in 2021 to 65 billion US dollars in 2024. This was something which was pointed out by the economic survey of 2021. Okay, so this is the state of Indian pharma sector. Let's look into the revised manufacturing norms which are there for the drug firms. First and foremost, the thing that we need to understand is why there was a need of these new rules. The first thing is we need to bring the manufacturing practices when it comes to the pharmaceutical sector in India at par with the global standards. Okay, because as I've told you, this good manufacturing practices was something which was brought by WHO and which is being followed globally. So we need to ensure that the manufacturing procedure when it comes to the pharmaceutical sector in India is at par with what we are witnessing across the globe. Okay, this is the first reason. Then what we have witnessed is when the union government inspected around 162 manufacturing units which are related to pharma sector, we witnessed a lot of deficiencies when it comes to India's manufacturing practices. What are those deficiencies? We witnessed that there is poor documentation. The raw materials were not tested before use. The products are not, going through quality testing. Then on account of poor infrastructure, the pharma sector is not able to prevent the cross-contamination between two drugs. Okay, and there is lack of qualified professionals as well. So these all deficiencies were pointed out by the union government on account of the inspections conducted by the union government. Then there have been reports by different countries that there is contamination in the Indian manufactured drugs. For example, recently in Gambia, a lot of children died because of consumption of adulterated drugs which were, produced by Indian pharmaceutical sector. And they died because of consuming the cough syrup which was produced by Indian pharmaceutical sector. And this is something that we are witnessing with regard to other countries as well. Okay. So in this regard, we need to, come up with this good manufacturing practices which have been brought up by WHO. Then last thing that we have witnessed is less number of manufacturing units currently in pharmaceutical sector are following this good manufacturing practice. So out of 10,500 manufacturing units, only 2,000 manufacturing units when it comes to pharmaceutical sector are following this good manufacturing practices. So in this background, the government has, basically stated to the pharmaceutical sectors that now you need to follow the good manufacturing practices. Now, the next aspect that we need to understand is what all changes we are going to witness on account of implementation of this revised manufacturing norms when it comes to pharmaceutical industry in India. First is, now the pharmaceutical sector has to carry on regular quality review in order to verify the consistency of quality and the processes. As I've told you, when it comes to the good manufacturing practices, it has provided guidelines with regard to the every stage of manufacturing. So under this regular quality review, what the pharmaceutical sectors would be doing is, they would be verifying that whether the product is following the similar procedure when it comes to producing a particular drug. So all the drugs, pharmaceutical drugs which are being produced, they should follow a consistent process, quality process, what we call it as. And if there is any sort of deviation, then they need to take adequate actions in that regard, okay, in order to prevent such deviation in the upcoming future. Then now they have to do proper documentation with regard to this thing, that whether they are following all the quality procedures or not. According to the experts in drug regulation, they have pointed out that, majority of the firms in India, they were following some of the steps or some of the procedure when it comes to the good manufacturing practices, but they were not documenting this. And if a process is not being documented, no regulator is going to believe that yes, you followed this very quality procedure. Okay. So now under this revised manufacturing norms, the pharmaceutical sector has to do, proper documentation that whether they are following all the processes or quality processes or not. Okay. Then now they have to carry out stability studies. What they have to do is they would have to store the particular product in stability chambers wherein they would be setting the temperature and the humidity, and after that they would be carrying out regular studies of those particular drug. Now it has become mandatory to carry out this stability studies. And lastly, now they have to come up with this good manufacturing practice related computerized system. What this computerized system would be doing is, it would automatically store the data with regard to this thing, that whether a particular pharmaceutical manufacturing unit is following all the quality procedures or not. And this computerized system would basically ensure that no tampering could be done with regard to the data. Okay. So these all changes we are going to witness on account of implementation of this revised manufacturing norms when it comes to pharmaceutical sector in India. Now the last thing that we need to understand is how it is going to help India. First thing, you would be provided with quality pharmaceutical products when it comes to consumers. Then the government would not have to carry out inspection at every stage by different regulatory authorities. Then it would enable India to become a pharmaceutical hub in the global, at the global level. So these all benefits we are going to witness on account of implementation of this revised manufacturing norms when it comes to pharmaceutical firms in India. This is all that you need to know with regard to this article. Let's move to the next. Now, this next article relates to railway infrastructure, and this topic relates to this very aspect of your GS paper 3 syllabus. Let's try and understand the context first. So the context is, recently the Prime Minister has launched revamp of 508 Amrit Bharat station across the country. Now the first thing that we need to understand with regard to this article is, what is this Amrit Bharat station scheme all about? Under this, basically 1,300 prime railway stations would be redeveloped. And when it comes to redeveloping these railway stations, local traditions would be reflected, local culture, local architecture would get reflected. When it comes to the Jaipur railway station, there would be glimpse of Hawa Mahal and Ajmer Fort. And the railway stations which would be redeveloped under this particular scheme, better amenities would be provided there, better sitting arrangement, better waiting rooms would be provided, Wi-Fi connectivity would be provided. All these aspects you would be witnessing under this Amrit Bharat station scheme. Now the next aspect that you need to understand is, what is the current status of railways when it comes to India? When it comes to the passenger segment, we are witnessing a growth in this passenger segment. Why? On account of urbanization and higher standards of living. And this passenger segment basically comprise 35% of the total revenue generated by the railway, in 2020-2021. When it comes to the freight segment, we are witnessing substantial growth in this freight segment. Why? On account of increase in industrialization in India. And this freight segment basically contributes to a majority chunk of the revenue generated by the railway sector. Around 65% of the total revenue generated by the railway sector in 2020 and 21. Then it has been pointed out by various experts that by 2050, the Indian railway network would be around 40% of the global railway network that we have in place. And in order to realize this idea, we need investment amounting to rupees 50 lakh crore by 2030. So this is the current status of railway. Let's look into the issues which we are witnessing when it comes to the railway infrastructure. First is the capacity constraints. According to National Transport Development Policy Committee, in 2009 and 10, what it has witnessed is, the majority of the high traffic routes, they are being utilized till 100%. Okay, so 66% of the high traffic networks which are there, we are witnessing that they are being utilized till 100%. However, the optimum capacity utilization should be around 80%, so that if there is any hiccups, then it could be managed accordingly. Then what we are witnessing is decline in the railway share across all transportation modes. When it comes to the freight tariff, what we have witnessed is it has decreased from this to this. And when it comes to passenger tariff, what we have witnessed, it has decreased from 68% to 10%. But when it comes to the road transportation, we have witnessed an increase in that. In 1950-51, it was around 32% and it has increased to around 90% in 2011 and 12. Why this is so? Because when it comes to the road transportation, the investment is coming from both the public as well as private sector. But when it comes to the railways, because the gestation period to build a railway network takes a lot of time. Okay, the gestation period is quite high. So on account of this, what we are witnessing is only the government money is coming up when it comes to building the railway infrastructure. But that is not the case when it comes to building the road infrastructure. So on account of this, what we are witnessing is there is decline in the share of railways across all transportation modes. Then we are witnessing that the trains which are there on Indian railway track, they are not able to attain their maximum speed. The maximum speed is around, let's say, 100 to 160 km per hour. But what is the actual speed that we are witnessing is 60 to 70 km per hour. But in developed nations, what we are witnessing is the trains are able to attain the speed of 300 to 350 km per hour. Why this is happening is, in India, the superfast trains like Rajdhani, like Shatabdi, they are also using the same railway track or same railway network which is being used by the other passenger trains. So on account of this, even despite having this fact that we have high speed rails, okay, they are not able to attain their maximum speed. This is also on account of, less investment on expanding the railway network. This was something which was pointed out by the Committee on Railways. Then we are witnessing that when it comes to the railway accidents in India, although it has gone down, but even today it is more than 100 per year. Why it is so? Again, it was pointed out by the Committee on Railways that it is on account of this fact that we are not investing much in increasing the railway network which is there. So what is happening is we are increasing the number of trains, but the railway network is more or less stagnant. So on account of this, the pressure is increasing on the already existing railway infrastructure that is there. And on account of that, we are witnessing railway accidents even today. Then railway accidents are also high on account of unmanned level crossing. Okay, although the government is taking requisite steps to do away with unmanned level crossings, it is going for automatic level crossings. But even today, there are a lot of unmanned level crossings, on account of which, at times we witness rail accidents, and at times we also witness, human-animal conflict as well. Okay, when the railway tracks basically pass through protected areas. So these are the major issues that we are witnessing when it comes to railway infrastructure in India. Let's have a look over the steps that the Government of India has taken when it comes to improving the rail connectivity in India. First and foremost, the government is developing this dedicated freight corridors. So we have West dedicated freight corridor and East dedicated freight corridor. When it comes to the West dedicated freight corridor, it would be connecting UP with Mumbai. And the East dedicated freight corridor would be connecting Ludhiana in Punjab with West Bengal. Okay. This West dedicated freight corridor is being funded by World Bank. When it comes to the East dedicated freight corridor, it is being funded by the Japanese. So this is going to increase the, the rail connectivity as well as improve the railway infrastructure in India as well. Then the other scheme that we have is PM Gati Shakti. Now, under this scheme, the government is planning to improve not just the railway infrastructure, it also intends to improve the road, the ports, the waterways, the airports, okay, all the infrastructure. So it intends to promote multimodal connectivity, seamless connectivity, okay, under the PM Gati Shakti. Then the government is also starting this Kisan Rail. So 157 trains would be launched on 8 routes, and this Kisan Rail scheme is going to give boost to the freight traffic, okay, or the freight segment when it comes to the railways. And this would enable us to transport around 49,000 tons of agriculture commodities. Then the government is also adopting green fuel initiatives. The government has planned that by December 2023, we would be going for 100% electrification of the railways. But what we have witnessed is, till 2021, only 66% of the railway tracks have been yet electrified. Then the government is also taking initiatives to connect the northeastern states and to connect the mining districts. Why is it so? Because when you see the northeastern states, they are basically the Himalayan states, so the terrain is quite tough, so it becomes very difficult to build rail infrastructure, okay, in this northeastern region. But the government is taking requisite steps so that the northeastern states could be connected with the rest part of India. And the similar is with the mining districts. See, usually the mining districts are found in places where the forest is quite rich. Okay, so in forest areas it becomes quite difficult to build the railway infrastructure. So that is the reason the government is taking adequate steps to improve the connectivity of northeastern states with the rest of the nation, and the similar is the case with mining districts in India. Now, let's have a look over the way forward. What more needs to be done in order to improve the rail connectivity and to overall improve the railway infrastructure in India? The first thing is we need to address the capacity constraints which are there. How we can do so? By increasing the railway infrastructure, by improving the signaling. Okay, if the signaling is improved, what would happen? There would be better communication, okay, and it would improve seamless movement of the rails. Then we need to increase the investment in the railways as well as its modernization. Okay, so this we need to do in order to reduce the railway accidents that we are witnessing, and we basically needs to increase the investment. Okay, in this regard the government needs to come up with certain schemes, or it should come up with certain incentivization so that the private sector could come and invest in the railways as well as in the modernization of railways. Then we need to build dedicated tracks for high speed trains so that they could attain their maximum speed limit. Okay, and these dedicated tracks should be coming up in those areas which are metropolitan areas, okay, highly dense areas, and wherein there is a lot of congestion when it comes to the road transportation and there is lack of air connectivity. Okay, so such dedicated tracks should come in these areas so that the high speed trains could attain their maximum speed. Then we need to improve railway safety. In this regard, Kakodkar committee has pointed out that we need to set up a statutory railway safety authority, okay, to look into the safety when it comes to the railways. And in this regard, it has also been pointed out that the Kavach system, which is right now being implemented in 2000 kilometer of the railway network that we have, this should be implemented across the railway network that we have. So it intends to prevent collision between two trains. How come? Under this Kavach system, what happens is, it is high class system which basically intends to prevent collision between two trains. How? By installing radio frequency devices in both the locomotives as well as in the railway tracks. So this is going to improve the signaling or the communication, and thus it would enable us to avoid the collisions between the trains and prevent the train accidents. So this is all that we need to know with regard to this article. Let's move to the next one. Now, this next article relates to a report which has been recently published by Zoological Survey of India, and this article pertains to this very aspect of your prelim syllabus. Let's try and understand the context first. So the context is, as I've told you, that the Zoological Survey of India has come up with a report titled 75 Endemic Birds of India. So according to this report, around 5% of the birds are endemic to India only. Now the first thing that we need to understand is, what are endemic species? Endemic species are those species which are found in a particular habitat or in a particular region only, and they are not found anywhere in the world. Okay, so according to this report, 5% of the birds species which are found are endemic to India. You take the example of Asiatic loins, which are endemic to the Gir National Forest that is there. Then if you take the example of kangaroos, they were originally endemic to Australia. So endemic species are found in a specific habitat, and apart from that habitat, they are not found anywhere in the world. And on account of this, it becomes very important to take adequate measures for the protection of these endemic species, because if we lost them in this particular habitat, then it would become difficult to ensure their conservation or ensure their protection. Now, the first thing that we need to understand with regard to this article is, what are the highlights of this very report? So according to this report, India is home to 1,353 bird species, and India encompasses or harbors around 12.4% of the global bird diversity that is there. And as we have discussed, that out of this, 5% of the bird species are endemic to India. That is, around 78 bird species are endemic to India. Now, out of these 78 bird species, 3 species have not been recorded in the past few decades. Which are these species? You need to know the name of these species because this might be asked in your prelims examination. These are Manipur bush quail, okay, which according to the IUCN status, its status is endangered and it was last seen in 1907. Then we have Himalayan quail, which is critically endangered, and it was last sighted in 1876. Then is Jordan's courser, which has critically endangered IUCN status and it was last seen in 2009. Then if you look at the geographical spread of these endemic species, what we have found is, majority of the species are found in Western Ghats. So 28 endemic bird species are found only in Western Ghats region. Example, Malabar grey hornbill. Then 25 bird species which are endemic to India are found in Andaman and Nicobar Island. For example, Andaman Creek. Then 4 are found in the Eastern Himalayas and 1 each in the Southern Deccan Plateau and the Central Indian Forest. So these were the major highlights of this very report. Now the last thing that we need to understand with regard to this article is about Zoological Survey of India. Now this Zoological Survey of India was established in 1916, okay, during the British Empire itself, and it is basically a subordinate organization under Ministry of Environment. What do you mean by subordinate organization? Which basically, plays a very important role when it comes to, storing the information, technical information with regard to that particular ministry, and which provides the executive direction when it comes to implementation of the policies of that very ministry. And its headquarters in Kolkata, and the major functions of this very body is, to carry out research with regard to the faunal diversity in the states as well as in the India, okay, and it comes up with the red data book when it comes to the fauna in the states as well as in India, and it conducts the periodical review of the species which are threatened and the species which are endemic to a particular region. Okay, so this particular body is basically working with regard to the faunal diversity, not with flora diversity. Okay, that is the animal species it deals with. This is all that we need to know with regard to this article. Let's move to the next one. Now this last article relates to the sugar production in India, and this aspects relate to this very aspect of your GS paper 1 syllabus. Let's try and understand the context first. So the context is, as India has excess sugar production, it is having a negative impact on the groundwater levels in India. Now the first thing that we need to understand is, what is India's status when it comes to sugar production? Now in 2021-22, India surpassed Brazil when it comes to sugar production. And in this very year, we exported around 110 lakh tons of sugar. Now in this regard, Brazil and Australia went to WTO. Why? Because according to Agreement on Agriculture, which is backed by WTO, no country is allowed to provide, domestic subsidies or export subsidies, domestic support when it comes to the agriculture commodities which are being exported. So in this background, these countries, filed an appeal in WTO, and the case was decided against India. Now the next thing that we need to understand with regard to this article is the sugar production in India. Why there is excess sugar production in India? First reason is, we are the largest consumer of sugar. So that is the reason we are producing large, sugar production in order to meet that domestic demand which is there, high domestic demand that is there. Then it is also high because of the government schemes. When it comes to union government, it provides fair and remunerative price. What is this? Under this, the sugar mills have to provide a minimum price to the sugarcane farmers. So on account of this, and on account of, the various incentives which are given by the state governments, which are guided by populism, what we are witnessing is, the farmers are moving more towards the production of this water guzzling sugarcane crop rather than diversifying the cropping pattern. Okay, this is one of the major reasons. Then what all efforts the government of India is taking to address this very issue? Now what the government of India is doing, it is diverting the sugar towards ethanol production, which can be used in cosmetic industries, in chemical industry, and in transportation sector as well. Okay, for producing ethanol blended petrol, which basically reduces the emissions, harmful emissions from the vehicles. And under this ethanol blending program, the government of India has targeted that we would be doing 20% of ethanol blending with the petrol by 2025. And currently, India has achieved 10% of ethanol blending with petrol. And in this regard, the government of India has also reduced the GST on ethanol from 18% to 5%. All these steps the government of India is taking to basically address this very issue. Now, the next aspect that we need to understand is how this excessive sugarcane cultivation is impacting the groundwater. Now, when it comes to India, 3 states are the major producers of sugarcane, that is Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh and Karnataka. They produce around 85 to 90% of the sugarcane in India. And if sugarcane was a totally rain-fed crop, then it would have required around 3000 millimeter of rainfall in a particular year. But what we are witnessing is, when it comes to these 3 states, they only receive around 1000 to 1200 millimeter of rainfall. So from where this deficit is being covered? It is through groundwater level. Okay. So when it comes to sugarcane, to produce 100 kg of sugar, you need 1 ton of sugarcane. And to produce this 1 ton of sugarcane, you need actually 2 lakh liters of water. So when we say that India exported 110 lakh ton of sugar, what we are doing is, we are basically exporting 26 lakh crore liters of water, which is termed as virtual water trade. What is this virtual water trade? Which basically refers to the hidden flow of water, because the commodities which use, a lot of water in their production are being traded. So when it comes to India, what we are witnessing is, we are, actually trading water Why? Because we are actually trading water guzzling crops like rice, like sugarcane, etc. And if you look at the groundwater level in Maharashtra, UP and Karnataka, in this regard, in 2022, Central Groundwater Board came up with its report and it pointed out that when it comes to the groundwater level in these three states, what we are witnessing is, it is semi-critical in Maharashtra, critical in UP and overexploited in Karnataka. So the sugarcane production, as we can, clearly see, it is having a very negative impact when it comes to the groundwater level in India. Then, last aspect that we need to discuss is, what is the solution to this problem? Obviously, we can't reduce the sugar production because we need sugar production to meet our high domestic demand. As I've told you, we are the largest consumer of sugar, and we need sugar production to get forex because we are exporting sugar. So we are earning foreign exchange on account of that. So what is the solution? The solution is, we can go towards drip irrigation, which would basically supply the water directly to the roots of the sugarcane. Okay, and it would reduce the water requirement by 70%. What amount of water that we use when it comes to flood irrigation. Then the government also needs to come up with such policies which incentivize diversification of cropping pattern. Okay. Then we also need to, adopt water management practices like rainwater harvesting, like recycling of wastewater. Okay. And lastly, we need to invest in surveying the groundwater level in India, so that we could identify that what is the availability and what is the spread when it comes to groundwater level in India. And accordingly, according to the particular region, okay, according to the availability of groundwater and how it is being used in that particular region, we could take adequate measures in order to conserve the groundwater level in India. Now, as India is, something wherein agriculture is the backbone of our Indian economy. So we need to, come up with sustainable agriculture practices. That is all that we need to know with regard to this article, and that is all that you need to know from today's newspaper. Thank you for listening to this discussion, and all the very best for your preparation.